I'm so excited to introduce a man, people say this all the time, but in this case, in this room, it's really the truth, who does not need an introduction. Mitch Resnick is the director of the Lifelong Kindergarten Program and the Lego Papert Professor of Learning Research at MIT Media Lab, probably the coolest title in academia, I'm pretty sure. I want to be a Lego anything. It is his mission to help kids keep that sense of wonder and creativity and exploration that we hope they feel in kindergarten going for the rest of their lives. He and his team develop new interfaces to help students engage with technology in a way that encourages them to create and experiment the way we all did in kindergarten. Some of Dr. Resnick's products include, I don't know, Scratch, anybody heard of that? Which helps young users learn to code, and the Computer Clubhouse, an international network of creative after-school programs for students in under-resourced communities. So I am very, very excited to introduce Mitch Resnick.
Great. Well, I want to thank Diane and thank Michael for inviting me, and it's great to be here for CSEdWeek. It was great that I was able to connect and to be here. And just spending some time ahead of time, it's great to reconnect with some people from the New York area that I've seen over the years. It's also nice to have some people from the Scratch team are here as well, Champika and Lisa and me, and former Scratch team members, Tim is over there. There are other people on the Scratch team that you might want to check out and talk to. So as Diane mentioned, I'm going to talk for maybe 10 minutes or so, and then we'll move into conversation. I thought I'd start by telling a story that goes back about 20 years. It was in 1999, right as we're about to enter the new century, the new millennium. And at that time, there were a lot of conferences that were looking at some of the great accomplishments of the past 1,000 years, and people were making predictions of their dreams and hopes and concerns about the next 1,000 years. And I was at one of these conferences, and I was on a panel, sitting on a set of chairs like this, and they asked us the following question. They said, what was the most important invention of the past 1,000 years? Of course, there were a lot of incredible inventions over that past 1,000 years, and some people on the panel mentioned the printing press, obviously an incredibly important invention that allowed people to share ideas across space and time as never before. And some people talked about the steam engine, which brought in the industrial age. Some people mentioned the computer that was invented towards the very end of the millennium, but already was having a big impact and clearly setting the stage for even bigger impact for the years ahead. But as I thought about it, I had a different suggestion that came to my mind about the most important invention of the past 1,000 years. And my idea was kindergarten. Whoops, this is going the wrong way. Okay, it's kindergarten. And that might seem surprising to some people because a lot of people don't think of kindergarten as an invention, let alone an important invention. But it really was an invention. The first kindergarten was opened almost 200 years ago in 1837 by Friedrich Froebel. And he was not just taking school and bringing it down to 5-year-olds. He was really reinventing an approach to learning and education. He realized that the standard approach to education those days wasn't going to work with 5-year-olds. That in most schools, there was a very broadcast-oriented approach to education. The teacher would stand in the front, say some things, students would write it down, maybe recite it back. And Froebel knew that wasn't going to work for 5-year-olds. So he came up with a much more interactive approach where kids were interacting with the world around them and building and playing and learning things in the process. And I think if you go to a lot of kindergartens today, you will see some of the current descendants of Froebel's ideas and the different materials that he developed. You go into some kindergartens, you'll see kids building, towers and castles with wooden blocks, making pictures with finger paints and crayons. And in the process, of course, they learn a lot of important ideas. You build a tower with blocks, you learn about structure and stability. But even more important, the kids learn about the creative process, how to start with an idea and carry it through to a project, how to come up with an idea, turn it into a project, start experimenting with it, playing around with it, sharing it with others, gain feedback from others, continually refining and adapting it over time. And they really learn about that creative process and develop as creative thinkers. And because of this, I really think that Froebel's original ideas of kindergarten are ideally suited for today's society. But in today's society, the need for creative thinking is more important than ever before. Kids growing up today are going to face a never-ending stream of unexpected and uncertain and unknown situations because the world is changing more quickly than ever before. So the ability to think and act creatively is more important than ever before. And kindergarten gives them a good start. But too often after kindergarten, kids get into a situation that might look somewhat more like this, where it's information is being delivered to them or instruction is being delivered to them. And even when new technology comes into the classroom, it's often applied in this model where the technology delivers information or the technology delivers instruction. And this approach even is seeping down into kindergartens. You go into a lot of kindergartens these days and you see kids filling out math worksheets and drilling on phonics and flashcards. So a lot of kindergartens are becoming more like the rest of school. And what we want to argue is for exactly the reverse. We want to make the rest of school, in fact, the rest of life, more like kindergarten. Because we think that kindergarten approach is exactly what's needed to prepare people to flourish in a fast-changing world like today's society. So as we've thought about this, how can we help kids develop as creative thinkers to prepare for life in today's world? We've boiled down the kindergarten approach to 4 guiding principles that we sometimes characterize as the 4 P's of creative learning: projects, passion, peers, and play. So if you go into sort of a really good kindergarten, you'll see kids work on projects based on their passions in collaboration with peers in a playful spirit. And we want to take that same approach and bring it to learners of all ages, because we think that's going to be the key to continue to have that kindergarten spirit of creative learning as kids get older. So this idea of projects, passion, peers, and play guides all the new technologies and activities and spaces that we work on. And for example, as we worked on Scratch, we thought explicitly about these 4 Ps. So I want to talk a little about some of the ideas that underlie our work with Scratch. I think a lot of you are familiar with Scratch. Here's the homepage from Scratch. Actually, it looks a little different today because there's banners for CSEdWeek. And we're excited about all the traffic that's coming to Scratch for CSEdWeek. We just saw the data. I think it was yesterday, was it 1.7 million? We have 1.7 million unique visitors came to the Scratch website yesterday. So a lot of traffic from it. Some of it was because a lot of you probably know the Google Doodle yesterday was first programmable doodle that used sort of some of our Scratch technologies, the underlying technology for it. In that sense, some people over, we had a lot of activities for CSEdWeek on the Scratch website. So we had lots of people coming to the Scratch website, but the numbers is not what's most important to us. For us, it's sort of the impact on kids and the way that it allows kids to start expressing themselves creatively. And we're excited about all the diverse ways that kids are using Scratch, because for us, the core goal is to help kids develop as creative thinkers so they're prepared to engage in this fast-changing world. So to give you a better sense of it, let me just tell you a brief story about one of the members of the Scratch community. There's more than 20 million young people have registered as members of the Scratch community. And this is one of them who goes by the Scratch username EPSA. And from an early age, EPSA loved to draw. So after school, EPSA would come home and fill notebooks full of sketches and drawings. And one day, a friend of EPSA's explained about the software Scratch. And EPSA hadn't done any coding before, hadn't done so much with computers, but this sounded interesting. EPSA's friend explained that with Scratch, EPSA could make their drawings come alive. And that seemed interesting. So this is one of the first projects that EPSA did with Scratch. As you notice, EPSA took one of their drawings and just added a little bit of animation. Notice the eyes and the ears are moving a little bit. And what I really like about this project is you could sort of see that EPSA was starting with something that they were comfortable with, familiar with, passionate about, drawing, but then used that as a way to reach out to try something new, coding, to enhance what they were doing. So this is the program that EPSA put together, stacking the Scratch programming blocks together to control the animation. So EPSA really saw there was a way to take their work further and became really interested in learning more about this. And EPSA continued to work on projects. A little while later, this is a project that EPSA created and shared on the Scratch website that got EPSA well known in the community. It was a project called Lemonade Time. And in this project, you use the cursor keys to control the movements of the otter. And the goal is to have the otter collect all the ingredients for making lemonade. So you get tips and ideas from the different characters and creatures you meet along the way to collect the lemons and the sugar and the water that you need to make lemonade. And this, EPSA was learning how to do scrolling backgrounds and lots of different techniques in creating this. And then when EPSA shared this online, it got a really strong positive reaction from the online community. If you look at the project page for Lemonade Time, you can see the project was looked at 17,000 times. It was loved almost 2,000 times. It was remixed 88 times, meaning that someone took EPSA's project and modified either the images or the scripts to create their own version of it. And again, that's the peers part of the 4 Ps. And at first, when EPSA started on the website, at first, EPSA wasn't so happy when other people remixed their project. They felt this isn't fair, they're copying, they're stealing my ideas. But over time, EPSA came to realize, and we talk about this in the community a lot, that that part of the idea of the Scratch community is to build on other people's work. Everything is covered by Creative Commons license, so we encourage people to build on each other's work. And EPSA came to recognize that when everybody shares, everybody benefits. So the same way that kids learn to share in kindergarten, EPSA was learning to share in an online community on Scratch. There are also lots of comments, about more than 1,800 comments, people giving encouragement and feedback and different ideas for it. And you can see that EPSA was really paying attention. If you look at the instructions here, it says, due to popular demand, the otter walks a little faster now. So like any good designer, EPSA was paying attention to what other people were saying and modified the work that they were doing based on the suggestions that they were getting. I'll show one more project. Over time, EPSA was finding more and more ways to share the things they had learned on the website. So here's a project that was a tutorial. But as you notice in the Lemonade Time, the Lemonade Time game, the background was scrolling. It's not so easy to do that in Scratch. In fact, we're trying to look at ways to make it somewhat easier. But you can see EPSA learned how to do it and want to share these ideas. So this is a tutorial that explains the way to make scrolling backgrounds. So EPSA is going to sharing their knowledge with the rest of the community. And this time we see a lot in the Scratch community. Again, finding ways to connect with peers, getting ideas from your peers, but also sharing with peers. When we first developed Scratch, we assumed that we would put some tutorials online, and we expected some educators, like some of you, would create tutorials in Scratch. We never imagined that kids would create so many tutorials. But you look at the Scratch website, there are literally thousands and thousands of tutorials on the Scratch website. Everything from how to make scrolling backgrounds, how to use variables, how to use the vector paint editor, how to make your projects popular on the Scratch website. There are tutorials about anything as you look around. So if we go back and think about these 4 Ps, you can really see it in EPSA's project. So this is what we're really hoping for. Now, some of this might seem obvious, but I want to stop for a moment and realize that this is not the way a lot of kids either learn in school or learn to code. Even with all the interest in coding these days, usually, in many cases, kids are not learning to code through projects. A lot of times, they're just sort of given some problem to solve or given a puzzle to solve. And again, that could be an okay way to start. And again, when I was growing up, I loved to solve puzzles. There are a lot of great things about puzzles. On the other hand, if you really want to help someone learn to write, you would not only have them solve crossword puzzles. Crossword puzzles can help you learn your vocabulary and spelling. But if you wanted to have kids learn to write and express their ideas to the world, you wouldn't just give them crossword puzzles to solve. You'd let them write their own stories, work on projects where they could share their ideas with the world. And we think coding should be the exact same way. The same way that you shouldn't learn to write just by solving puzzles or responding to some questions, but you should learn to express yourself. That's the way we see coding as well, by projects where you can develop your voice and share your ideas with the world. So that's what we see EPSA doing. And one reason we really love it, we see EPSA, you can see that she's developing her voice through these projects, finding ways to share their ideas based on passions. You can see with EPSA developing, drawing on, EPSA was drawing on their passion for drawing, and then many of her other passions, connecting with peers in a playful spirit. So as we continue to develop Scratch, we're constantly thinking, how can we make sure that we support all of these 4 Ps? Before ending, I was just going to give a little sneak peek. As some of you know, we're working on the next generation of Scratch that we are calling Scratch 3.0. So I just want to have a little sneak peek. There's a lot of different aspects of Scratch 3.0. It's going to be much better designed for mobile devices. You can use it on tablets, which is a challenge with Scratch now. Be able to see projects on your phones. There are a lot of different elements. The thing I want to highlight now is we're really trying to make it easier to extend Scratch with new capabilities. So in addition to the ways you use Scratch now, we're making it easy for other people to add extra collections of programming blocks. We call them extensions to add new capabilities to Scratch. So we'll provide some of these extensions, and we're hoping that people in the community will add others. So I'll just give like one example. We've been experimenting with new speech blocks. So some blocks, they have speech synthesis. So you can have a Scratch block to actually have characters talk. Rather than just voice balloons, you could actually type in things and they would say it using different speech synthesis. Or speech recognition. If you use a block that says, when I hear a certain word, then I should do something. So like here's a project, if you see here it says, when I hear time is it, then I speak, it's party time, and do other things. So if you say, what time is it? Party time. It says party time. So again, we're always looking to see how can we connect to the interests of the learners, to allow them to express themselves in different ways, use the media of the days of today. We see so many different, kids grow up in a world where lots of things are listening to voice, responding to it. We don't want them just interacting with these new technologies, but they should be able to create the technologies. We want to give them the building blocks where they can create things. They shouldn't just be using, Google Home and other things where it's listening to it, but they should get a sense of how that works by creating their own interactive speech programs. So that's one example, and again, maybe in the discussion we could say a little bit more about some of the new directions we're going. This is something we're going to have a public preview version of Scratch 3.0 actually sometime next month, by the end of January, and then we hope to have the public full release of it by the end of next summer. So we're working hard on it, the team is working on it. We're really excited to get this out there. Let me just end my remarks with going back to kindergarten. So I want to share a story that I heard from a friend of mine who had a daughter in kindergarten by the name of Lily. And Lily came home from school one day and was telling my friend about a friend of Lily's in kindergarten, Daisy. And evidently Daisy had started kindergarten at a very early age and was spending 2 years in kindergarten. And Lily explained it to her mom this way. Lily said, Daisy did kindergarten last year and is doing it again this year for 2 whole years. I want to do kindergarten again too. And when I heard this story, of course, part of me was happy because clearly that Lily was enjoying kindergarten. And also Lily was appreciating that kindergarten was a special time and a special place, the same way that I think it is. So it's great that Lily was really appreciating that. But in hearing this, I also can detect the concern that Lily has, that Lily might never again have the same opportunities for creative play and creative expression. And I share Lily's concern. I worry that too many kids aren't going to grow up having those opportunities. So I think what we're trying to do with Scratch and other projects that we work on is to make sure that kids like Lily and Daisy, as they grow up, will continue to have opportunities to have a kindergarten approach to learning. We want to make sure that through Scratch and other technologies, we can provide them with opportunities to work on projects based on their passions in collaboration with peers in a playful spirit, so they can continue to express themselves and experiment and explore as they continue to grow older. Because I think there's nothing more important than the ability to think and act creatively, in today's society. So we want to make sure that we, provide all kids that opportunity so they can be full and active contributors to a fast-changing society. We're working on that, and but it's an effort that requires everybody. It's a big effort to shift people's mindsets and change educational systems to support this. So I hope all of you will join us and try to think about these issues and to try to make all of life a bit more like kindergarten so that kids like Lily and Daisy can grow up with, to be able to take full advantage and grow to their full potential as creative thinkers. Thanks a lot.
I think we'll put you in the middle.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm a middle child out of 3, and as I was growing, my mom wrote a book called Mitchell in the Middle, so I felt.
And I'm going to ask my panel to join us here. And I think we'll introduce ourselves. There you go. So I'm Diane Levitt. I'm the Senior Director of K-12 Education for Cornell Tech.
Hi, I'm Alexis Dixon, and I'm a 4th grade teacher in Williamsburg. I'm part of the first cohort of SEP Junior. I'm teaching computer science and as well as Scratch as part of a project-based learning unit.
I'm Kelly Powers, and I am working at South Bronx Early College Academy in the Bronx, and I serve as an instructional coach to STEM teachers, and I've been teaching computer science for about 21 years.
I'm Carlos Leon from Co-Interactive. We train teachers to teach CS.
To Kelly, and keep that close to your mouth. You just hold on to that. The rest of us are mic'd. We're good. So I am actually going to kick it off because I have a burning question, and that is, if you could create any Lego brick that does not exist, like what are we missing in the Lego world? What brick?
So first, what reminds me of the story, I saw this film that the Lego company made where they interviewed kids about their hopes and dreams. There was this one kid they interviewed about what their hopes and dreams were. They said, well, what I'd like is I'd like to eliminate hunger and achieve world peace, and I'd like a round Lego brick. But for me, maybe it's, obviously we've been doing a lot of work with connecting Lego bricks with technology. So I think for me, trying to make more things of Lego bricks that can make it even easier for kids to make their creations come alive. So we're working on that, but I think there can be more and better ways to build not just static structures, but things that come alive with sound and music and light. Not just movement, not just motion, but all different types of ways to come alive.
And now it's you.
All right, my question is, what role do you see Scratch playing in the elementary school classroom in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I guess the thing that I'd hope for is, I made the analogy before with writing, and we really want to take seriously that analogy with writing, that in a lot of schools, kids learn to write, but then they use it in all of their different classes and all their different activities. So ideally, I'd really love to see Scratch used that way, that kids develop a type of fluency, express themselves with Scratch, as they do with writing, and then they use it in all sorts of different ways. So like, there's some elementary schools I've visited where they do it this way. If kids are writing a book report, they make an animated book report using Scratch. If they're doing something in science, they do a science simulation using Scratch. So it just becomes another tool for them to express themselves. So I really want to take seriously the idea that it should be, like learning to write. So I've been very inspired. Some of the great literacy movements of the world, Paulo Freire's, his literacy movement, it was not just teaching people to write so they could get jobs, although of course it does help you get jobs, but he said it was important for everyone to learn to write so they could feel like they could be active contributors to society, full members of society. So I sort of see it the same way, letting people express themselves so they can share their voices so they can feel like they're full participants in society.
All right, thank you.
Kelly?
So Mitch, I have a question from the classroom from one of my students. And they get so delighted when they become scratchers after creating Scratch projects for a while, and they get this title, you're a scratcher. So what they're curious about is, if they're now a scratcher, what would it be like to work on the Scratch team? And because I'm working with 6th graders, 10 years from now, what would it be like in 10 years from now for our students to perhaps work and contribute to the Scratch project?
Yeah, first of all, people don't know, when you first join Scratch, your title is like as a new scratcher. and you have to participate in various ways in order to then become a scratcher. And you get some added privileges and capabilities once you become a scratcher. And actually, we really, before I answer your question, we've thought about this, and we want to continue to think about it. We want people to feel that as they become a scratcher, it's not just they get some new privileges, but also they should feel a new sense of responsibility, that they're now a full member of this community, so they should also take some ownership of it, and they, to sort of help spread the values of the community and stand up for the values of the community. So we're always thinking about that, like a rite of passage is what we want it to feel like. And as far as what it's like to be a member of the Scratch team, well, we do have some members of the Scratch team over there, so you could talk to them afterwards. I do think that we try to run our own team through those same 4 Ps. So the 4 Ps are not just things that we do that we say, oh, it's good for kids to do those. We try to run our own group where people are constantly working on project based on passions, collaboration with peers, a playful spirit. And when we say playful spirit, it's not just about laughter and playing games. But when we say playful, we mean experimenting, trying new things, testing the boundaries. So I think we try to keep that spirit alive in the Scratch team, where people are constantly working together, experimenting, trying new things. So I think that's the spirit that we're working on. So of course the technologies will always change, and now we're doing more with mobile devices. In 10 years there might be some other new technology, but I don't think the technology is the most important thing. I think those 4 Ps will stay the same. So I think that's the thing that will be constant, and my hope is that the Scratch team will still have that feel 10 years from now.
When we think about how students interact with Scratch, especially with there being over 25 million projects out there, what are some unanswered questions that Scratch has sort of surfaced about the way children use Scratch, particularly as it comes to like sharing and peer?
Yeah. Well, first, I do think, at least for myself, Scratch was introduced 10 years ago, so we have 10 years of experience with it now. And at least for me, some of the biggest learning has come from the area of how kids collaborate and share with one another. And maybe that's because I already had some experience with having kids as creators, having done some things with the Lego company. For me, with Scratch, what was most new was the idea of the online community, kids sharing with one another. So I think I've been always taken by surprise by the incredibly diverse ways that kids end up collaborating and sharing. Like some things that I just hadn't thought about. And it could be that it's a generational thing. I do think some of the graduate students in the group are more, who grew up with the internet, maybe had better intuitions about this. Like I was really taken by surprise with things, kids would start putting up projects where they would crowdsource. They were doing a project and they wanted another character. Rather than developing their character, they put up a project saying, I'm looking for a sister for this character, it has these qualities. Can people sort of submit different characters, and then I'll choose one and put it in. So people were crowdsourcing. Other people were offering their consulting services, saying that I really enjoy making these types of backgrounds. If you need that for your project, write a comment below, and I'll help you doing that. So there's all this trading and collaboration back and forth in ways that I never imagined. So I continue to be taken by surprise with all the different ways that kids are collaborating with one another and sharing with one another.
So I have a master's degree from Bank Street. So for me, your work is very resonant around the constructivist framework that I learned to teach in. So I felt like reading the book because I read Lifelong Kindergarten and really enjoyed it. There's a kind of a thread, right, that starts with Froebel and goes to Piaget and Dewey, to Pepper, to you. And I'm curious who you see researching now that's sort of on that trajectory. Whose work do you see as sort of taking that legacy forward? And it can't be someone on your own, of your grad students.
We can't be my former graduates. I do think for me it's a lot, the ones who I feel most, but I do have some former graduates who are now out in the world doing wonderful things. I mean, a lot of you I know Karen Brennan, who's a
Yes.
former student in our group, who's now a professor at Harvard Ed School, is doing wonderful work with teachers and teachers as learners and teachers as designers, and I think really carries on this spirit, but also adding a new layer to it. Or my former student, Rick Rose Roque, who's now at University of Colorado at Boulder. She did a project called Family Creative Learning, So was really trying to think how these technologies could be used to support activities with families, of parents and kids learning with and from one another, which again, I really like, again, how that sort of took the work and really stretches it in a new direction. Or a number of people are doing things, wonderful work now of looking at data from the Scratch website. We have this unbelievable collection of data with all these projects that have been created over the years. And my former student Shaimandu Dashgupta, or members of our current members of our team, Andrew Slawinski and others, are doing analyses of this data and looking at different ways that kids, what is it that, what differentiates which kids stay engaged and which kids don't stay engaged, and being able to use that to get a better understanding of the learning trajectories. So I think all of it is still looking at learning trajectories of how kids make their way of making sense of the world and adding new possibilities to the things they do, but always trying to see what are the new ways we can make use of the new technologies, the new things that are available to us to help support kids in those creative explorations.
All right. Do you have any Scratch pet peeves?
Pet peeves. Like the pet peeves can be a lot of different things. So, I'm trying to think, like, so what are some of the things that, I'll sort of think aloud because I'm not sure exactly what, because there's something I was trying to think, is it stuff about the programming editor and the online community. I do think, like, maybe one pet peeve is the way that some kids respond to things. When I talked before about remixing, there's still, if you ask kids about, typically we want to be very responsive to members of the community. I think it's really good for us to be responsive to what kids in the community are saying. But at times when we've asked kids for their suggestions, one of the most common suggestions that kids will make is they want to be able to create projects that cannot be remixed. And so that is something that kids will often ask for, but even though we typically want to support kids and what they're asking for, we don't want to support that. So we then have to explain to kids why it is and trying to help them see things in a different way. And as I said before, that when everyone shares, everyone benefits. But I think that's hard to get beyond that way of thinking. So there's still a lot of that way of thinking that still gets into the community, and trying to help shift kids' ways of thinking about sharing, I think is important. It reminded me that at one point we gave people, it was in some event like this where people were meeting each other and wanted to sort of have some icebreakers, and we gave everyone the question, as you were growing up, which of the following was the most difficult for you? Learning to ride a bicycle, learning to code, or learning to share? And of course, for most people, it's learning to share. The learning to code is easy compared to learning to share. And so I still think that's a real challenge. Although there's so much sharing that goes on in the Scratch community, helping to support a type of, an embracing of a sort of a sharing mindset towards the community, I think is still a challenge.
So I'm just going to push back a little
Yeah.
bit. You're telling me that when you're scratching,
Yeah.
there's no block or thing that you go, "Ah, why did we do it that way? I wish we'd done it."
Okay.
No?
Oh yeah, no, so there must be, okay, so let me think about, so of our designs, things that I wish we did differently. Well, to some things that come to mind, one thing that I wish were easier in Scratch, it's not very easy in Scratch to have different scenes, like when you're doing a story. When we did Scratch Junior, we made a better way of having scenes, but it is one of the challenges. Now that there are 25 million projects out there, it's harder to make certain types of changes, even when we do a new generation. So I wish it were easier to have like different scenes in your story, or different levels in your game. It's something that's not as easy as it might be. And that's not just one block, but I think some of the decisions we made about the way that we structured things made that not as easy as I wish it would be.
Scratch 5.0.
Yeah, well, I did others. Can I put some of the other Scratch team members on the spot? Do you want to share any of the pet peeves you have, things that you wish were done differently in Scratch?
They're not willing to admit it.
Sitting with the boss.
Yeah.
I think, well, something,
This is Tim, who is a former Scratch team member, now works in New York.
maybe there's certain struggles in like Scratch 2.0 that are gonna get better soon. Like I know I always want to open up projects like on my phone and like see things people have shared, and it's just impossible right now.
Yeah.
But that's not really a design thing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, not just Bill notes. Some of that was based, at least partly that's based on, and these are the challenges of designing things. So we had the first version of Scratch came out in 2007, and then we did an updated version in 2013. And the first version, you had to download Scratch, you ran it on your local machine. In 2013, Scratch 2.0 was embedded in the browser. So the version we see now, we can just program right in the browser. But we started developing that like in 2010 or so. We implemented it. It seemed like at the time the way to do it was implemented in Flash. At the time it made sense in 2010. It ended up it wasn't a great choice for 2017. So that's one of the things that's getting changed now. Jen Pika, you have anything you want to share? No pet peeves?
I mean, this is similar to like I think the paint editor is one that is like, I wish that our paint editor was better, and actually in 3.0 we're going to have a much better paint editor, which I'm excited about.
Well, another thing that I'll give a pitch for Scratch 3.0, we paid more attention to the visual side of Scratch and less to the sound side of Scratch. So both, even though the paint editor could be improved, it's a lot better than the sound editor. We have an almost non-existent sound editor. And we have some graphic effects. You can do different things with adding different graphic effects to your images. We don't have ways of adding sound effects in a good way. So that's one thing we're doing in Scratch 3.0 is paying more attention to the sound and the sound side of things. So I do think that's something that's been a weakness that now not all teachers out there are going to be happy with us for that choice, because you're going to make it much more exciting for kids to do lots of things with sound. And actually, I'm not so excited about having lots of headphones in classrooms. So I'm hoping you can find creative ways of allowing people to use sounds and to share sound-oriented projects.
Is the cat gone? This is what I want to know. The voice, the sound. There's 6 more.
So actually, the cat is staying maybe with slight changes. We had to have some questions whether the meow will change a little bit. Although the image library is going to be changed a lot. So one thing was we've had those same images for a long time. We've gradually added a few. And so we're working with a bunch of illustrators to get a whole new set of backgrounds and images for the image library. So I do think that's going to be a really noticeable difference. So it'll still be the cat as the default image, and some of the core characters will be there. And if you don't know, the Champ 99 sprite, which is Champika, the photograph of Champika, will still be there. So don't worry, Champ 99.
We might change it. We might update it.
Right.
I was just talking.
Oh, I didn't know that. That was news to me. So Champ 99 will be there. No, but I do think that we're going to do a lot with the images. And one thing we're going to try to do, and actually this is, I don't know if this is exactly pet peeve, but I do think it was one problem is, although we tried to make a good image library, that image library doesn't, obviously times change, we want to change things, but also it's not right for all kids in all contexts. So say internationally, although we tried to think of things that would work internationally, it was developed by illustrators that we were working with locally. So we have much more international set of illustrators for the next version. Also, we're trying to build the infrastructure so it'll be easier for other people to add image packs. So we want to make it easier, the same way that I talk about adding extensions with new programming blocks. We make it easier for people to add in new image packs. Because somewhere else in the world, if they have a local artist who makes great images and a classroom wants to have those images available, they should be able to add it in. Or if you're working in a class with somewhat older kids or younger kids and want different images, we want to be able to have it be more flexible with being able to add different images. So that's something we're working on, to be able to not just have a new set of core images in the library, but to be more flexible. And I think that's probably a general theme is with these extensions, trying to make it easier for other people to add things and swap things in and out is one of the things we're trying to do more of.
Kelly?
So I'm going to ask you another student question.
Yeah.
He's on the video, but Juan.
Oh, did you want to play the video?
Well, we'll pass on me, I'll pass it to you, and then we can play one of the videos.
Yeah, because we had some videos of Kelly's students. So.
Do you want to say that for us?
So, yeah, sure.
Okay.
It was on my desk. It was on the desktop. It was a folder on the desktop, so probably got trouble.
Thinking broadly about sort of teacher practices,
Yeah.
moving testing aside, if you could wave your wand and sort of challenge us as educators to change one of our practices currently, which one would it be?
Yeah. Well, actually, the first thing that comes to mind are not necessarily teacher practices, but school practices. So let me start with that, then maybe I'll come back to it. Because I sometimes think about of trying to break down a lot of the barriers. So, different disciplines are too much in silos. So trying to bring together different disciplines. So, allowing kids to work on projects that cut across disciplinary boundaries. Another barrier is the barriers of time. That too often things are constrained inside of a 50-minute class or a 1-week lesson plan. So a lot of times that's out of the teacher's control, but trying to break down those barriers to let kids work on longer periods of time on their projects. Or have kids work across ages, older kids and younger kids working together. So the age barrier is another one that I'd break down. But maybe another one, and this gets closer to teacher practice, is teacher as a learner, making sure that the teacher is also learning all the time, and the teacher being a participant, not just providing support for the students, but the teacher also creating, experimenting, trying new things, so that the students experience the teacher as a learner as well. And it's something that I always try to do it. It can be challenging when I teach my classes. I try to keep thinking that way, but it's not always easy. That's one thing I try to keep in mind during my teaching. So we have some.
Who's our student? So this is Juan. Juan is an 8th grade student. He had his first experience with computer science in 6th grade. Many of our students don't have access until they come to our school, and he's one of them. Oops, I'm sorry.
All right. Get them to the bottom.
Put the mic on. Turn off the mute.
Hey, Mr. Resnick, now that Scratch has become more popular, has it become like you intended it to become?
So did it become what we intended to become? Well, I do think that when we started, we really did have high hopes that something that could be used by lots of people. And it was sort of inspired by my mentor, Seymour Papert, and his programming language Logo, which did get out to a lot of kids in the 80s and 90s. And when I started working with Seymour, I experienced that and saw it go into the world, but didn't really sustain it. So we saw the possibilities how some of these things could spread in the world. So we did have real hopes for that. So I do think that, again, I think it's even exceeded our hopes in the scale at which it's gotten out to the world. Again, some of the things on the positive side, and I do think the online community, at least for me, was even more important than we imagined. We knew it was important. We launched the online community the same time as we launched Scratch, but I think for me at least, it was even more important than I even imagined. As I said before, all different ways they could share and collaborate with each other has been really inspiring for us. I think some of the challenges which we sort of imagined but are still there, there's still a lot of places where the tool itself doesn't dictate how it's going to get used, and Scratch still will sometimes be used in ways that don't align with our vision. We sometimes talk about, there was one day, we looked at the Scratch website, and I saw like 30 identical projects, and my first thought was there must be some bug, but I looked, they were all done by 30 different kids, and then realizing what had happened was clearly in a classroom where the teacher said, do this, do this, do this, and they'll share. So you get 30 identical projects from 30 kids, and that's certainly not the way we imagined Scratch, or that we hoped Scratch would be used. So I think it's both, we see there are a lot of things that have surprised us in wonderful ways that have gone beyond what we imagined. And even though we developed Scratch, people used it in so many ways that we never imagined in the positive sense. but it still gets limited in being sometimes used in very traditional ways of, sort of follow these instructions and then see how well did you follow these particular instructions, which isn't the way that we were hoping would be used.
We're ready for your questions. We have friends with microphones, so put your hand up and there we go.
Yeah, so we went to professional development over the summer, and there was this really nice, I guess, program that used Logo, I guess the language. You said Mr. Harper was your mentor. Things with Project Guts, and it's got this very nice, they do more simulations, and they grab the data, right? They take input. So that's something I'm hoping that, like the kids can do more with in science when they're younger with Scratch. And hopefully then, I don't want them to learn two things. It's better if we just can, and then they have like 3D, which is really cool. The other thing is also physical computing. I saw some people were doing like where Scratch can connect to hardware. And that's also very interesting. I think those are the two things that I'm just thinking, like, for the future, do you see more, like, input of data, simulations, graphing, 3D, and more, like you said, with the blocks, like the Lego, more like physical computing?
I do think one area which we definitely want to push in the future is sort of connecting Scratch to all sorts of other things. So some of it is connecting Scratch to the physical world. We already have ways of using Scratch to control some Lego robotics. We want to make it easy for Scratch to connect to all different types of physical devices, whether it's robots or sensors or controlling the lights in the room. So these days it's often called, Internet of Things. Scratch should be the programming language to control things in the world around you. So whenever you want to control anything that's dynamic or interactive, you should be able to use Scratch and add ways for Scratch to connect to the physical world, but also to connect to the online world. Like right now with this speech recognition software, that's a web service. So Scratch is going out and using a web service that is developed by Google and then bringing information back. Or Scratch will go and connect data from online and bring it out, and bring it back. So you should be able to use Scratch. If you want to make a real-time weather map, there should be Scratch, an extension where you can go out and get the current temperature in a certain city and bring it into your project. So we're seeing Scratch as a hub for connecting to many different things. Actually, I'll show one more example. That there's a test example from one project that we're working on. So this is an experimental version of Scratch we're working on. And this is an effort we're doing in collaboration with Spotify, the music service. And so this is a Scratch project. Again, this is just an experimental version where you can write a Scratch project that says, what's your favorite song or musician? So someone might type in like Madonna. And notice, importantly, that the characters are dancing in sync. Because part of what you want to do is not just be able to go out and pull in music from online, but also get information. So if we look inside here, so these are the new blocks that you have. And some blocks are, this is the view that says play music like. So you can just say play music like, and then I could say anything. I could say play, well, if it's play music like tacos. Yeah, so it goes out to Spotify, brings back an appropriate song, but then also it comes with information about the rhythm of the song. So like this, every beat next costumes, there's a new block every beat. And then, again, each of the characters has, you can see it's just going back and forth between the two costumes to make an animation. So again, that's sort of an example of how we want to sort of just connect to other services to make Scratch more of a hub that you continue to use to connect to things in the world. I do think it's one of the reasons, I think there are a lot of reasons why Logo is still around, but Logo got into lots of schools in the 80s and 90s, and in some ways then didn't continue to grow. And I think part of it is it didn't keep up with some of the new things that kids wanted to connect with. So it was missing some, after a while, the P of passion. Because just the simple types of creations kids can make, Logo didn't offer the full rich media connecting online. So we want to make sure that we continue to allow kids to connect with the different services, capabilities, but use programming in a meaningful way. I mean, you have to do it where programming has to be a meaningful thing. So we're always trying to see how we can make sure to stay aligned with kids' interests and passions and give them new ways of expressing themselves.
Hi, Mitch. My name is Leanne Weiser. I'm from CSNYC and CS for All. We're seeing an increasing number of teachers get involved in computer science education. And maybe 10 years ago, we thought about what was the kids' one exposure to computer science? And so richness in one particular tool or one particular thing was super important. And I'm curious now, as students get multiple exposures over many years, how do you see Scratch fit into the landscape of all of the things a kid will do in K through 12? What is the role of Scratch in that learning progression? Especially for teachers who are thinking about working in classrooms where Scratch is part of a series of things that kids do. What's the thing that makes Scratch unique and give it ownership of some of that learning journey that a student might take?
See, for me, I think what we'd hope is, again, making the analogy with writing, that once you learn Scratch, you can do so many other things. I remember one thing that really struck me, when I first started getting involved with this, and I arrived at MIT in the mid-1980s and started working with Seymour Papert, working in schools with Logo. And Seymour had this project in a public elementary school in Boston. And it was one of the first, it was called a high immersion project, that there was enough computers for one computer for every couple of kids, which was huge, high density of kids back then. And kids were doing Logo for all sorts of things. And it was a school that went up to grade 5. And after the first year, some of the kids then graduated, went on to middle school, grade 6. And at that middle school, they used to teach Logo. But the middle school teacher, when they found out that the kids had come from this school where they had already done a lot with Logo, said, oh, since you already did Logo, we're going to have to do something else. And in my mind, that was exactly the wrong thing to say. It should have been, that's great, now they've done Logo, there's so much we can do on top of that, and we can use it for so many different things. So for me, it's a matter of fluency. So I worry that it shouldn't be about sort of just dabbling in lots of things. We're getting a fluency, then use that fluency to do many, many different things. And some of the different things of, using but in some ways it could be to new ways for artistic expression, new ways for collecting and analyzing and representing data, new ways of controlling things in the physical world, new ways of collaborating with others. So those are all important things to do. I think what we're hoping to do is to have a common platform that you could use for all of those things. Now, whether we live up to be able to do that for all of the things, but I think that's the vision. We want kids to be able to express themselves in so many different ways, both express themselves and analyze and understand the world in all these different ways. But I think it would be ideal if they could learn some common core framework, and then once they feel comfortable and familiar with that, then they'd be more able to use it in all these different ways, rather than sort of starting over from scratch, learning something new all the time.
Questions?
Hi, Mitch.
Hi.
Thank you. I actually met you 19 years ago at a workshop in Maine with Laura Allen. You were there, and Seymour Papert, and Michael Temple. Is Michael here? Anyway. You developed Scratch in 2008?
Well, it launched in 2007. We started work on it 2002, 2003,
Right.
and then launched in 2007.
Okay. And you're facing the imminent Scratch Flash conundrum, the death of Flash.
Yeah. But the new version is going to come out next year, so we don't think that that's going to affect us.
HTML5.
So the new version, the Scratch 3.0, which again previewed in January, out by the end of the summer, is based on HTML5, and so it won't have any of those issues.
Terrific. One other thing. You were saying before how an unexpected consequence of launching Scratch was that some teachers use it in an old-fashioned way, sort of the factory model where all 30 kids in the room do the same project. Are you aware of Google CS First?
Yep.
They do the same thing.
Yeah.
And yet, it's kind of cool, because I was teaching game design using CS First, and Google supplies volunteer, professional, and all the swag, little stickers, booklets, stamps, anyway.
Well, although a couple things, again, I think is, also just on their own Scratch website, we have 10 different introductory activities,
Right.
tutorials, and I see nothing wrong with, a class
Following
that's
the
starting on
recipe.
all of them. Although, as we have those tutorials, we try to have the right mix, and I think CS First does some of this as well, of doing some step-by-step to help kids get started, but then trying to encourage them to go beyond it and sort of start modifying it, doing their own way. Again, somewhat inspired by the way I hope that Lego would be used. The Lego building instructions, there's nothing wrong with Lego building instructions to get started, but if that's all that you do, then I think there's a problem with that. If you start with that and you're learning some of the basic skills, but then start to express yourself and take it in your own directions. So that's what we're always trying to do, is to make sure there's space for kids to be able to take it in their own direction and add their own aspects to it, is what we're always aiming for.
One last comment? No, I'm out of time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here, and actually for everyone putting this together. I think, just a comment first and then the question. It seems to me, after working in the schools for many years with integrating tech and STEM and STEAM, that Scratch, unintended or intended, has become, for kids, a professional learning community, or maybe you call it a passionate, playful learning community, a PLC, a PPLC, that for adults we've seen is very beneficial, and the research shows that adults learn better if we're connected and we have social learning. And this is a thriving community that's safe. We can't always send a fourth grader out to the internet to learn from each other, although we do in school. But this has become a really safe environment to share, and I think that that's fantastic, and that can be, there's still a lot of growth there for schools and teachers and informal learning places.
Well, thank you very much. And because it is something that we work really hard at. There's a bunch of members of our team that sort of support that online community, and we work really hard to try to make it a safe, friendly, constructive place, which is challenging because on the internet there's a lot of bad models. And we want to make sure that it's still openly expressive. With some kids sites, give kids choices that they have to just choose from 3 pre-canned responses. So we want to let kids really develop their voice, be fully expressive, but we also want it to be safe and friendly. Yeah. So it is an ongoing challenge, but we see it as a central thing. To be honest, we spend a lot more time working on that than developing the language itself. So I think the community is something that we see as really important.
So I take back the unintended comment, and thank you for the intentionality. My question is, and if you can address quickly, I'm in over 50 schools in the New York area working with teachers. The biggest barrier to this is not the teacher's ability to learn and to guide, it's the test calendar. It's what is coming from university admissions on down to the K-12 sphere. And I know you speak a lot. Are you working on advocacy for the state or beyond so that changes? We can't bring project-based learning or problem-based learning and creative empowerment into the schools until that changes.
Yeah, well, I agree that those changes are really important. I guess I've tried to focus, for me, one of the most important things is to first try to get a better understanding of what the goals of education should be. Because trying to change the methods before there's an agreement on goals, I think often goes astray. So the reason I focus so much on helping kids develop as creative thinkers and allow creative expression, for me, those are some of the goals that aren't commonly accepted goals of what education should be about. Because if the goal of education is to, and a lot of people do say it is, learn some very particular skills and to master these particular skills, then it's going to be hard to move away from a testing regime that is, sort of, assessing how well people develop those particular skills. Whereas I think if we can get people to have the mindset that what education is about is to help people develop as, to think creatively, read systematically, work collaboratively, some of those things are very difficult to assess. So I think part of my message is we have to get an agreement about what these important goals are for the current society, and then recognize that the things that we see as most important aren't easy to assess quantitatively. So the approaches that are currently being taken with, is not going to take us to where we want to get to. But we have to sort of try to get to, I think in my book there's a lot of focus on where are we trying to get to, and then how can we try, after you agree with that, then how can we try to get there?
I'm Mitch, Susan at Roosevelt High School. I actually have a question about your book.
Okay.
So you've opened doors and created difficult conversations for many years about coding and coding in school. In the New York City Department of Ed, which I'm very, very devoted to, we're having a lot of conversations this year about difficult conversations and having difficult conversations in school. I read out loud to my class today part of your chapter about tinkering, and I realized this is a difficult conversation. So please help us bring it into school, and if you want to say a word or two about that part of the book.
Yeah. So, and so it's in the chapter about play. I talk about tinkering, which I see as tinkering is like the intersection of making and playing. So it's a playful approach to making. And I talk about that oftentimes there's a greater value in society overall and in schools in particular on sort of planning. And again, planning is a useful thing, but too often there's overemphasis on that it's as if the only way of going about something is you have to come up with a plan, execute it, and then you're done. And that seems very efficient. Come up with the right plan, execute it, seems very efficient. The problem is, a lot of times, you don't come up with the most creative solutions by doing things in a planful way. You can't adjust to changing conditions if all you're doing is following a plan. So with tinkering, we mean being able to constantly try things out, adapt based on what it is. So it's a much more iterative approach. And to us, that's the way we do our own work. I think the reason that the Media Lab is such a creative, innovative place is because people are constantly, tinkering, iteratively refining. They try something, revise it. So that idea of seeing the process of making things as an iterative process where you're constantly adapting and refining is where I think creativity comes from. There's a problem that a lot of times people see tinkering in a different way, and they see it as just tinkering, as though it's not going anywhere. And even see this, you look up some definitions of tinkering, and it says aimlessly work on things. So if it's just aimless, then that's not a good thing. Or one way that I sometimes think about it is, you might think of planning as top down. You have your goal, and then you execute it. Tinkering can be described as bottom up. You start experimenting, and you get some ideas, you adapt it, and you sort of keep climbing, and till you get to somewhere that is interesting. Sometimes people, they see tinkering as just bottom, not bottom up. If you're just stuck at the bottom, you're just aimlessly wandering around, that's not good. So we have to give people a richer sense of what we mean by tinkering. I was just having this discussion. I do a lot of work with the Lego toy company. And when they read that section of the book, they push back because they say when they go to their customers, meaning teachers, when they're trying to sell their products to schools, they say if they try to talk about tinkering, there's a lot of pushback because it's seen as not getting anywhere or being aimless. So I think that if we use the word tinkering, we have to help people understand what it's about. What's more important than the word itself is make sure people recognize that type of iterative, refining, adapting, constantly experimenting, adjusting based on what's happening to make sure people have that mindset, because that mindset is what we mean by a playful mindset. So I think that's what we really want to try to get across.
Hi, I'm Judith Seidel, and I teach at Friends Seminary in Manhattan. I teach programming both during the day in regular classes and after school. And my question is about connecting children to other children all around the world. So my students, especially the ones after school where it's less structured, they have their own accounts and they're playing around and they're making friends, and they're doing a lot of the wonderful things that you've been talking about, and it's great. I also am involved with a global education initiative at my school, and I haven't connected up the two areas of my life. How can I help those students, is there a way to structure that, or is it really more like tinkering? Can we help students who have Scratch online accounts make friends all over the world and therefore break down some of the barriers and to increase understanding of different cultures and make the world smaller?
Well, first, I'll sort of digress a little bit. I hope this is okay with you if I digress a bit. But was one thing that I'm glad that you asked this question about sort of connecting kids around the world, because what it brings to mind is it just so happens that Judith's husband went to the same summer camp that I went to growing up. And so we've talked about this. And in this summer camp, I see it has really had an influence the way I think about Scratch. It was a summer camp where it really was about the importance of connecting different people from around the world and being respectful and sort of supportive of people from all different backgrounds and all different cultures. And at the end of the summer, there was sort of a festival with songs and dances from people from all over the world, for people to experience, sort of the different peoples of the world, and to sort of, connect and sort of feel a connection to the peoples of the world. And some people have, said that creating the Scratch community is in some ways my effort to try to recreate that summer camp, and I think there's some truth to that. And I do think that it's something that we do care about, that I do think one of our motivations is to try to make connections, one of the reasons for the Scratch Online community. I still think there's a long way to go to try to help make those connections. I think right now we do see, like there's some of my favorite projects on the Scratch website are about kids connecting around the world. There's, a young woman from South Africa who connected with 4 different young people from other countries, and they worked together on this series of projects that were sort of inspired to address, to help them reflect upon some of the issues raised by apartheid. So drawing on important social issues and kids around the world connecting around those issues to work on a fantasy story where they explored some of those issues. So we see great examples of that online. But to your question, how can we do a better job of supporting it? I think, I think some of it is trying to, use some of here's just some ideas of doing it. First of all, on the Scratch community, you can find a lot of forums for kids. They're forums where kids are looking to collaborate on things. So using the forums on the Scratch online, having your students look at the forums on the Scratch community where there are forums in the discussion forums where kids are looking for collaborations across boundaries, and that way of things that are doing it. There are opportunities on educator sites as well, like the CSEdWeek website. I think there's some opportunities of trying to reach out to other Scratch educators in other parts of the world, for doing it. I know some of the teachers here, I know Susan has done some of this, and others of connecting with, so trying to learn from one another of how they've sort of made connections. Coming to Scratch conferences. We're having another Scratch conference at MIT. I know you've come to some of the Scratch conferences. So it's the end of July. It's July 26th through 28th, starting with an opening reception on the evening of the 25th at MIT next summer. And usually at the Scratch conferences, there's probably like close to half of the people are from outside the United States. Is that right? Probably close to about half the people. So all these educators from around the world. Now again, not everyone can come to MIT for the Scratch conference, but looking for opportunities like that where you can connect up with Scratch using educators from other countries, whether it's online on Scratch Ed or going to conferences and doing it, just trying to connect with individual other teachers and sharing things. Beyond the other, yeah.
I actually have a quick example. If you look
This is Mi Win, who works for the Scratch Foundation.
Don't speak without a microphone.
Yeah.
There's a group called Inventors for the number 4 Change, based out of Spain, and they actually work with another school in India, and they've been doing it for 4 years now, where their classes actually video conference with each other, so they meet each other first, and then the teachers actually work together to pick a topic for them to look at. And the one that they did last year was actually about the refugee crisis. So they talked about it in their respective classes, but then both classes also kept a blog, and they kind of shared their thoughts or pulled links about what was being written in their own respective countries about the crisis. And then one group actually created sprites to go into a Scratch project, and then they sent them to the other class, and they either voiced the sprites or programs, and they kind of went back and forth with
But that's good. Maybe I'll mention one other place to look. As some of you know, our group recently ran an online course, primarily for educators, called Learning Creative Learning. So it's learning about the creative learning process. So if you just search for Learning Creative Learning, you'll find it. The 6-week course, it was a 6-week course that ended. All the material is still online, so you can look at it. But also now we're trying to extend it. Even though the course is over, we want the community to live on. So there's sort of several thousand educators associated with that community. And what we're trying to do now is support them sharing ideas with one another. So I'd encourage you to go to the Learning Creative Learning online community. And there's now some forums there where people, we're hoping people will share ideas with one another about projects they're doing and looking for collaborations. So that's at least one other site where you could look for, there's people on that site who sort of at least share the spirit of creative learning. A lot of them are interested in Scratch and might be potential. And that's a very international community as well.
I have a quick question. You mentioned that you've collected about 10 years of data, and whether you are beginning to have a response or an answer to the question about what happens after Scratch, how it's affecting the students who have used Scratch, and maybe more importantly, how it's affecting the faculty or the teachers who are using Scratch for their classrooms.
Yeah. So we've done, several members of our group have done, some of it we have some just online data, but we've done a lot of interviews. I think some of the most interesting things have come from several members of our group. I mentioned Rick Rose Roque earlier, Natalie Rusk from our group. Rick Rose, Natalie, and others have interviewed lots of Scratchers to tell their sort of learning stories and their trajectories over the years, and sort of seeing about what it is that they got them started with Scratch, what kept them going with Scratch, what they learned from Scratch. So I think we have a growing body of case studies about the different learning trajectories of kids who have grown up with Scratch. And it's been inspiring to us to see the way that the lessons learned on Scratch have then influenced the way they approach other things in the world, and how they start thinking about other things differently based on their Scratch experiences. So there's some papers online about those, telling some of those Scratcher stories, and I think that's one interesting place to look. Also in my book, Lifelong Kindergarten, there's several Q&As with some longtime Scratchers that is part of that also looking at. So I think we want to do more of that, continuing to look at the trajectory of Scratchers over time. With educators, I think Karen Brennan has done some work like that. Others might have as well. In our group at MIT, we haven't done as much with that, but I think checking Karen's site, I think would be a good place to look.
We have a question here.
Hi, I'm a really young technology education teacher, and I teach K through 5 elementary, and my biggest challenge was my upper loop elementary, that is 3 to 5, they can go online, they can explore different Scratch projects, and they can look what students have done, they can get ideas from it. My challenges came 1 and 2. Kindergarten, 1st and 2nd. What happens over there is, even if we do Scratch Junior and students create projects in Scratch Junior, there's a lack of outside collaboration. Students cannot explore projects. That being said, even if I do project galleries in the classroom, where different tables are set with different projects of students, it's still confined to the classroom. So the challenge remains of students getting ideas from different students all over the world, as Scratch has inspired every student in that classroom. Regarding that, what are your thoughts? And in future, when it comes to very young students learning technology, how can we effectively have a collaborative environment?
Yeah. Well, I think it's something we definitely want to sort of add some new capabilities in Scratch Junior to address that. But we're still trying to figure out, because I think our feeling is Scratch Junior is intended primarily for ages 5 to 7. And sort of having a full online community didn't feel like the right approach to us. But we think that we need to provide better types of sharing. Clearly, a very common request we get with Scratch Junior is to have better ways of supporting with family and friends and classmates. And I do think that there should be more of that. And that's something we plan to work on in the future. One thing that will help it, right now, Scratch and Scratch Junior are like 2 totally different pieces of software. as we have this new version of Scratch, Scratch 3.0, the next version of Scratch Junior will be based upon the same software. So it'll put us in a better position for doing more different types of sharing than has been possible with Scratch Junior today. Unfortunately, this will take a little while. This is not going to happen, in the next 6 months. But I agree that we want to have better ways for kids to share, see each other's projects, but we think it has to be a different way than with Scratch, and we're still figuring that out. And if actually, if other people are interested in that, it's a good ongoing topic that we're interested in thinking more about.
And a big thank you to you and your team.
Yes.
Who's got a mic? Nobody. Okay. Oh, go.
I work on Scratch with 3rd and 4th graders, and even at that age, they are very interested in metrics. They want to be popular. They want hits. They want to create hits. And I wonder if you could address the mentality of an 8 or 9-year-old. What kind of advice would you give them about how they can get their project to be more popular, more liked, featured, and move straight to the top of the charts?
Yeah.
Featured projects.
Right. Although, I'm not sure that that's what I'd want them to be focusing on.
Well,
So I
of
wouldn't give
course,
that
that's my problem,
advice,
because I
yeah.
don't share those values.
Right.
But that's what they're into, and that's where the passion comes
Yeah.
from.
I'm going to try to really, at least give one quick thing. As I mentioned earlier, there is this, one of my favorite projects on Scratch is this, how to make your project popular. And so if I can find this really quickly, I'm going to see. Give me 1 minute to see if I don't find it quickly, I'll skip up on it. Maybe not. Well, I could look right there, but it's, I think, and it's not that so before answering your question, it's one thing we've tried to deal with in Scratch was we don't want to encourage that type of mentality. We do certain things, obviously we feature projects on the homepage. It's a source of great pride when kids get their project featured on the homepage. On the other hand, we don't do things, when we feature someone's project, on their profile page, we don't put a big star or ribbon or banner saying, this person has been featured, or we don't put on, they've been featured 4 times. We don't want to highlight those things. We also saw that some kids would try to use certain metrics on the site. I forget exactly which ones, like even things like the number of projects you've created, and they would sort of see who get the biggest number. So now if you get above 100, it's just 100 plus. I think it's for number of projects, or at least for a lot of the things. If it goes above 100, it just says 100 plus, because you don't want to encourage kids to be trying to get the biggest number of things. So we try not to encourage that more. So I think that trying to highlight the other types of values, of trying to get them interested in doing a project that about the nature of the comments that you get. So rather than trying to get the project with the most comments, try to do a project that gets the most interesting comments. So trying to have different types of goals that they have, or the type of things I would try. But I know it's a challenge because it's something that, as much as we try not to have too many explicit, points and rewards, kids will make up their own things, that they'll make projects, they'll sort of award each other points for things. So it's something that comes naturally that a lot of them will want to do, but we try not to encourage that.
Andres?
Hi.
Mike's not on.
Yeah. Hi. Mitch, can you say something about parents and how parents are engaged in terms of advocacy for this or not, and whether they know the difference between giving kids access to a computer and then programming and coding, and then what does creative coding mean, or what is tinkering and design and coding mean, which is very different than putting a piece of paper in front of a kid and having code. Or how are they involved in this process?
Yeah, well, and we haven't done so much explicitly on that, and I think there's a lot more we could do. And my hope is that other people are doing things, and there's more that we could do. I mentioned my former student, Rick Rose Roque, did family family creative learning. And actually, she has a great guide. So if you search online for family creative learning, there's a wonderful guide about how she ran her workshops. It's full of great ideas for parents to support their kids. So that's one place to look. I think one thing which we haven't done to now, we've talked about trying to do more of, we don't have good connection to the parents of Scratchers. Partly that's because we want to make it very easy for kids to join Scratch. So wherever possible, we tried to let kids join without parental permissions because we didn't want the friction there. We want to make it easy for kids to join. But partly because of that, we don't have such great connections with the parent community, which I think would be a good thing if we could do more. We're trying to think about how we could have a better audience so that we could send mailings to parents. We do some of that now because we do have, now if kids are joining under the age 13, they are supposed to give a parent email address and people can opt in to, and we sometimes will send mailings. We haven't done so much. There's more that we could do around that, and we'd like to have some regular mailings that could address some of these issues. I think we've done it by some of the things we write in the world, like the book Lifelong Kindergarten is meant to try to, one way of helping people learn about those approaches that we take with Scratch. And we have some things on the site for parents, but not a lot. I think over time, we'd like to do more, being able to reach out to parents of Scratchers. Again, we meet some parents who are wonderful. We go to Scratch Day events and see some parents who are wonderfully supportive and engaging the kids in exactly the right way. But I think there are more ways that would be great to support parents. There's some things we could do, but it'd be great if all of you could share ideas around that as well with parents, if those of you who have teaching classes of kids, trying to reach out and engage the parents. In some ways, you might have better ways of connecting directly to the parents and hopefully sharing the types of ideas that we were talking about today. And we talked about the learning, or encourage them to look at the creative learning site and other places like that.
So we're going to close soon. Two things I want to mention for those of you who want to think more about Scratch in the classroom. One is, Kelly, just want to tell everyone about the Scratch meetup that you run?
Yes, so we run a Scratch meetup, Carlos and I, we run a Scratch meetup for New York City, and Diane and CSDA, and we have been speaking to perhaps make some of our meetings collaborative. But you'll be hearing more from our group in January because we are working with the Scratch Ed team at Harvard to strategize to recruit members of the community to come to the meetings where we do have some awesome conversations and we dig into what the audience really wants to dig into because it is what we call an unconference, and it's an opportunity to truly have some experience and not so much experience at the table, and just really answer your questions. We have them usually once a month, the third Thursday of the month. But we're going to pick that up most likely in January, but we're closely watching the CSTA calendar so that perhaps we can have joint meetings.
Great. And the other thing you should know is it still Tom O'Connell who's teaching that class?
As far as I know, yeah.
Tom O'Connell from Code Interactive has been teaching a course at Lehman College on teaching computer science with Scratch. 40 hours of really fantastic instruction on CS integration using Scratch, and so that's another opportunity for you. So the way we close this...
Can I make a final comment?
Of course, you can make a comment. We're all going to make comments.
Oh, okay. So I don't want to jump in then if I'm going to get a chance later. I just want a chance at some point.
You'll get it at the very end.
Okay, fine.
So we do now just a very quick round of what we call takeaways. This is, Mitch has given us all a lot. We're going to give him back a little bit. I've been told by my colleagues at Cornell Tech to remind you that this is not a chance to ask questions if you didn't get called on. So we're going to just do a few quick takeaways. And I will tell you that my quick takeaway, which my colleagues I think will be grateful for, is this idea that you use those 4 Ps for your team culture as well. I'm going to take that back for my team culture, so thank you for that. Do you have a takeaway, Alexis?
I think my takeaway is the idea of like creating more flexibility within the curriculum. So thinking about when I'm designing my project for my students, how to create more integration amongst the content areas.
And mine would be students one mic while speaking to Scratch.
I think my takeaway is going to be that Spotify link for the summer. So gone are the days where I pull up Britney on the YouTube.
Are we allowed to tweet that?
So, yeah, and actually, you could actually, right now it's just an experimental version. We have this experimental site. It's not going to be around forever, but you can look at it. It's called ScratchX. You go to ScratchX, that's up there, this experimental site. You could play with it. We're still not sure if it's going to make it to Scratch 3.0 because there are a bunch of licensing issues that we have to deal with. So I'm not sure it's going to get out there, but it's one of the things we're experimenting with, and that's ScratchX is this experimental site, so you can see some of the things we're experimenting with there.
Takeaways. Anybody got a quick takeaway for us? Okay, there you go.
Well, big takeaway would be, I love how you talk about logo programming and how it become obsolete, and being able to like catch up with digital native here is to keep updating Scratch to be relevant to what they're up to.
The one thing I have to be careful about, I still have a lot of friends in the logo community.
Oh, I love logo. I
If they quote me saying the logo become obsolete,
No.
I know I said some things like that, but be careful of.
She meant relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Relevant. Not obsolete.
But
Take back.
it is true that I think I did one. Yeah.
Ted?
Yeah, I mean, I think, thanks a lot for the presentation. I took away that you started working on this in 2002, and here we are 15 years later, and it just shows how much persistence and hard work is required to get a project like this off the ground. So I really appreciate all that you've done.
And I think, Gordy has a takeaway.
I really like the language around sort of purposeful tinkering, the bottom up versus top down. That's something that's a word we kick around all the time in the office, the school rather, and some people like it and some people don't. It has a sort of pejorative sort of connotation, and I'm going to be stealing that language. So thank you.
One more takeaway, when you look down and you see a student's project and you see something bizarrely from popular culture, just stand back and just laugh about it and enjoy the moment as you're still laughing about this.
And now you may have the last word.
Well, actually, before I'll talk about last thing. Also, one takeaway I had when I talked to the students from Dalton.
Oh, they've gone home to do their homework.
So someone was one of the things that I really liked was one of them said to me that when they learned Scratch, one thing I think they said in 8th grade or 9th grade, and they said one thing that really struck them is that they learned in school, but they want to keep using it at home, and that made it really different from other things they were learning at school. And that is something that makes me feel good, because I think that's one of our goals is a lot of things that are developed for school aren't things the kids want to keep using on their own. And for us, for things to succeed, it has to be things the kids want to keep using. So I was really happy when she said that. And then the final thing I want to say is that although we have a group at MIT who's working hard at Scratch and continue to develop new things, putting it out there, what makes Scratch succeed in the world is people like you, and educators, parents, and kids around the world. Because in order to really get sort of the creative possibilities, it requires lots of people everywhere. So I just want to thank everyone here for all that you're doing, because that's the only way that Scratch really lives up to the possibilities of supporting kids as creative thinkers, is having whole communities of people who are supporting them and doing that. So thanks to everybody who's helping with that.
I think it's very rare for us to be in a room with someone who has created so much change in our lives, in our lifetime, that we are living with and learning from. And I think I speak for everyone in this room when I say thank you so much.